The ice groaned under their weight, a hungry, ominous sound echoing through the silent wilderness. Each step was a risk, the frozen river threatening to swallow them whole at any moment. A small band of men, wrapped tightly in animal hides against the biting cold, strained to push their crude wooden boats across the half-frozen river. Their breath hung in the air, mingling with the mist rising from the ice as they fought both exhaustion and fear. These were Cossacks, outlaws, adventurers, and hardened frontiersmen, led by the legendary Yermak Timofeyevich, a man whose name would soon echo across the wilds of Siberia. Behind them, the smoke of burned villages marked the path of their advance. Ahead, only endless white, the vast, unforgiving expanse of Siberia stretching farther than any of them could imagine. Their mission was a desperate gamble, a shot in the dark with everything at stake. They were venturing into the unknown, with no guarantee of survival or success. Russia in 1581 was hungry for wealth, power, and new lands. These men were the tip of the spear, sent to claim a fortune for the Tsar and perhaps, in doing so, secure their own freedom. They carried primitive firearms, sabers, and an unbreakable will. Their weapons were simple, but their determination was ironclad, forged by years of hardship and war. The cold was a constant enemy, gnawing at their strength. Food was scarce, and every day was a struggle to survive. Local tribes watched from the shadows, wary of these armed strangers who trespassed on their ancient lands. The Cossacks were intruders in a land with its own rulers, its own traditions, and a history stretching back centuries. Every encounter was tense, every negotiation fraught with danger. Yermak and his men pressed forward into the unknown, driven by the promise of untold riches and the hope of a pardon from the Tsar, a chance to trade their outlaw lives for glory and reward. The scale of Siberia was unimaginable, larger than the entire United States, filled with wild rivers, towering mountains, and endless forests. It was a world unto itself, mysterious and perilous. To conquer it seemed impossible, a task fit for legends rather than men. The land itself seemed to resist them at every turn. Yet this small group was about to ignite a fire that would sweep across northern Asia, changing the fate of empires and peoples alike. Their journey marked the beginning of a century-long struggle, brutal conflict, unimaginable endurance, and the collision of worlds that would reshape the map of Eurasia. Failure meant death, by winter's icy grip or by the arrows and spears of native warriors. Success, however, promised fortune, fame, and the birth of a new empire on the edge of the world. This trek was more than a single event. It became a symbol of the Siberian conquest, a testament to human ambition and the relentless drive to push beyond the known. It was human ambition pitted against the raw power of nature and the fierce resistance of those who called this land home. The world was about to be redrawn, one frozen, perilous step at a time, a gamble for an empire that would echo through history. To truly understand Yermak's daring gamble, we must look to Moscow, the heart of a restless and ambitious empire. Here, Ivan the Terrible ruled with iron will, hungry to expand his empire's reach and power. Years of brutal wars had drained Ivan's treasury. Gold was scarce and the state coffers echoed with emptiness. Yet, in the cold north, a different kind of wealth beckoned. Fur, the soft gold of the age. Sable, fox, ermine, these pelts were the ultimate luxury in Europe's courts, and Siberia was rumored to be overflowing with them, a land of untold riches waiting to be claimed. The dream of conquest began with the Stroganovs, a family of powerful merchants who controlled vast lands on Russia's wild frontier. Granted enormous territories by the Tsar, the Stroganovs built forts and hired fierce Cossack warriors to defend against the Siberian Khanate, ruled by the formidable Khan Kuchum. For the Stroganovs, Siberia was more than a security concern. It was a chance to solve their frontier problems and amass incredible wealth. Enter Yermak, a legendary Cossack leader, and his 840 battle-hardened men. They were mercenaries, promised supplies and support in exchange for defeating Kuchum and opening Siberia's riches to Russian trade. This bold conquest began not as a grand state campaign, but as a private venture, an audacious expedition into the unknown, driven by hope and hunger. The Tsar needed new sources of revenue, the Stroganovs sought profit and security, and the Cossacks longed for fortune and a royal pardon for their past crimes. This unlikely alliance, state power, merchant capital, and frontier grit, set in motion one of the largest territorial expansions in world history. The insatiable hunger for fur would soon unleash a wave of change, transforming not just Russia but the entire continent's economy and culture. Siberia was never just a land grab, it was a calculated business deal, a gamble with consequences that would echo across the world for centuries. The Cossacks' perilous journey was the spark that ignited the conquest, and once the empire's appetite was awakened, nothing would stand in its way. Siberia was no empty wilderness, it was home to dozens of indigenous peoples. From reindeer-herding Nenets to Evenki hunters, each group had its own language and way of life. Their world was governed by nature and spirits, with shamans as healers and guides. Every mountain and river was sacred. Survival demanded skill and respect for the land. They hunted, fished, and lived in balance with nature. The Cossacks brought firearms, forts, and a hunger for fur, forces the native Siberians had never faced. Russians saw only resources, not the spiritual meaning of the land. The arrival of Yermak's men was a collision of worlds, spiritual connection versus commercial exploitation. The stage was set for violent confrontation. The old world was about to be shattered. Yermak's first and most formidable obstacle on his journey into Siberia was the powerful Sibir Khanate, ruled by the ambitious and cunning Khan Kuchum, a direct descendant of the legendary Genghis Khan. The Khanate's influence stretched across the vast steppes, and its people were fiercely protective of their homeland. Kuchum's Tatar warriors, renowned for their horsemanship and archery, prepared to defend their territory. They faced Yermak's small but disciplined force of Cossacks, who were determined to carve a path into the unknown east. The decisive confrontation erupted in October 1582, near Kashlik, the Khan's fortified capital. The air was thick with tension as both sides prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of Siberia. Outnumbered and surrounded, the Cossacks quickly formed a defensive square, bracing themselves behind wooden barricades. At Yermak's command, they unleashed a thunderous volley of musket fire. The deafening sound and swirling gunpowder smoke sent shockwaves through the Tatar ranks. Their arrows, once so deadly, now bounced harmlessly off the Cossacks' armor and shields, rendered useless by the new power of gunpowder. Overwhelmed and terrified, Kuchum's army broke ranks and fled the battlefield. Victorious, Yermak and his men marched into the abandoned capital, claiming it for the Tsar. The Khanate had fallen, but Khan Kuchum himself managed to escape into the night, vowing revenge and refusing to surrender his claim to the land. Yermak sent word of his victory, along with rich Siberian furs, to the Tsar in Moscow. In return, he received a royal pardon for his past crimes and much-needed reinforcements. Hailed as a hero by his men, Yermak celebrated his triumph. But the war was far from over. Kuchum's guerrilla attacks and ambushes in the forests and snow never ceased, keeping the Cossacks on constant alert. In 1585, tragedy struck. Yermak was ambushed during a night raid and drowned in the icy river, weighed down by the heavy chainmail gifted to him by the Tsar. The great conqueror was dead, but his legacy endured. The door to Siberia had been forced open, forever changing the fate of the region. The conquest did not end with Yermak's death. Cossack and Russian forces pressed ever eastward, determined to claim the vast wilderness for the Tsar. The Tsar's empire had crossed the mighty Urals, Siberia's fate was sealed, and a new chapter in Russian history had begun. Yermak's death only accelerated the Russian advance. The state took over following Siberia's great rivers, the highways of conquest. Cossacks traveled in sturdy boats building wooden forts, ostrogs, at key river junctions. These forts became military, administrative, and trading centers. Tyumen, 1586, and Tobolsk, 1587, marked the start. Soon, forts stretched to the Pacific. In just 50 years, Russians reached the Sea of Okhotsk. Each fort was built on violence. Local tribes resisted fiercely. The Cossacks demanded fur tribute. Refusal meant villages burned, hostages taken, and bloodshed. The rivers ran red with resistance. The conquest was a relentless military campaign, not peaceful settlement. Fort by fort, river by river, the empire expanded. The wooden stockades marked the timeline of conquest. The land was claimed, but at a terrible cost. The advance was unstoppable. Siberia's fate was now in Russian hands. The wilderness was being tamed by force. Russian control relied on the Yasak, tribute in furs. Subdued tribes paid annual pelts, hostages ensured compliance. Divide and rule was key. Russians exploited tribal rivalries, making and breaking alliances. Alcohol was traded for furs, devastating communities. Firearms and forts gave Russians a decisive edge. Native resistance was fierce but fractured. Behind the reports of victory were stories of suffering. Land lost, families torn apart, leaders executed. The fur trade depleted animal populations, disrupting ancient balances. The conquest was a story of dispossession and sorrow. For many, it meant the end of their world. Empire came at a human cost. The deadliest weapon the Russians brought was disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through isolated native communities. Some areas lost up to 90% of their people. The Great Dying shattered societies and resistance. Yet Siberian peoples showed resilience. Some retreated, others adapted, becoming guides or traders. Intermarriage created new mixed communities. Russian and indigenous cultures blended, even as the Orthodox Church tried to convert the natives. Languages and traditions survived in secret. The conquest's impact was not just destruction, it was also survival and adaptation. A new hybrid Siberia emerged from the ashes. After the fur rush, Siberia became a land of exile. The Tsarist state sent prisoners and dissidents east. The katorga was a brutal ordeal. Exiles and settlers built towns, and the Trans-Siberian Railway stitched the land together. Siberia became a strategic and economic asset. Under Stalin, forced labor in the Gulag mined resources and built cities on suffering. Soviet industry transformed the land, often devastating the environment and indigenous ways. Today, Siberia is Russia's resource heartland: oil, gas, diamonds, timber. Cities that began as forts are now industrial centers, but scars of conquest, exile, and forced development remain. The struggle to preserve indigenous cultures continues. Was the conquest of Siberia heroism or tragedy? It's both, a tale of courage and endurance, but also of invasion and loss. Russian explorers crossed a continent, mapping and settling new lands. But for indigenous peoples, it was the start of dispossession and devastation. The fur trade brought riches and ecological ruin. Disease caused demographic catastrophe. The heroism of conquerors was the tragedy of the conquered. The true cost of empire is measured in both glory and pain. Siberia today is a monument to ambition and to suffering. Its story is a mirror of human greatness and destruction.